But in any case, like just to take the things that you said, what exists and how do we know, like when you have revelation or not, like in terms of your epistemology, what you think are the sources of knowledge available to human beings, that makes a huge difference. Because again, there are many things that we as Muslims would affirm the existence of and the truth of and the reality of. And if you ask us on what basis are you affirming that, we will say we are affirming it on the basis of divine revelation.
Yeah.
Right? So if we take, for example, the question of knowledge and epistemology, as Muslims, obviously, the Quran is something that is front and center. So there are many, many things that we affirm knowledge of that is based, if you ask us, what is your basis for affirming this knowledge? We will say our basis is divine revelation, the Quran and also the prophetic sunnah. So what are things that we can know about if revelation really is an authentic source of knowledge that you could not know otherwise? Well, again, we said before, we have very particular knowledge about the nature of the world, about the nature of God who created the world, our relationship to him, the relationship of everything that exists to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah says, وَإِن مِّن شَيْءٍ إِلَّا يُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِهِ. There's nothing that exists except that it sings the praises of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, except we don't understand or like perceive their tasbih, right? This is a very different way of looking even at the quote unquote material world that the secular person and say the Muslim both agree exists, right? When the secular person looks at that, they just see matter in motion, like just dead matter, like, or, obviously living things as well, but it's just kind of matter. It doesn't have anything beyond that. When a Muslim who knows about Islam and is infused with the Quranic vision of the world, looks out at the world, we realize that the birds, when they're chirping, they're communicating with each other and that, but they're also making tasbih, right? They're actually glorifying their creator. That's a very different way of looking. The tree outside my window is making tasbih, like literally. I don't know how. I don't know. Allah says, وَلَكِنْ لَا تَفْقَهُونَ تَسْبِيحَهُم. You, mankind, you don't understand, you don't perceive, they're tasbih, but they are making tasbih, right? So just things like that, like seeing the world as like a divine epiphany or something, like the science and manifestation of Allah's names and attributes. Again, if you say like our affirmation of the existence of things like angels and jinn and things like, the life in the grave after death and everything we know about the day of judgment, which is critical to how we live our lives. We're supposed to live our lives with the day of judgment in mind, that we will one day die. We will be called to account for our deeds. There is heaven and hell. The Quran is very, very specific about what those places look like and what the experiences are of the people who live in them, right? If you take revelation out of the picture, none of this is knowable because we can't derive it through reason. I can't say, well, there's a logical proof that there must be a heaven and a hell, right? I mean, pure reason can't give you all that much. Like it can help you avoid contradictions and think correctly, but in terms of affirming what exists, there isn't that much to tell you. And then also, if you say, well, we have reason, and the only other source of knowledge we have besides reason is empirical science, well, obviously science, these things are, by virtue of the fact that they're in the ghaib, they're in the unseen realm, they are not accessible to scientific observation.
Right.
I mean, science as a tool is built to look at the seen realm, to investigate the realm of the shahada only. So if there is an unseen realm, then by definition, that realm is not amenable to scientific, inquiry. And if you think that scientific inquiry is the only way to reliably know something, then of course you're going to say, well, all of this stuff is nonsense. Like, how could you possibly know that there's an afterlife? How could you know there's a heaven and a hell? No, I'm
right.
saying, how could you know that human beings have a ruh?
Like looking from their lenses, they can't see it.
All of this is just, this is just speculation, right? It's just speculation because there's only two sources of knowledge, reason and science, and those two sources of knowledge don't provide knowledge of any of this stuff. And in fact, you see in the modern world, as they kind of move beyond revelation, their own revelation, right? Bible and then Christianity as a religion, as they move beyond that as a worldview, right? All of these aspects of it, which they also believe in traditionally, right? Christians believe in a heaven and a hell and an afterlife and a resurrection. And I mean, they're very similar to Muslims in that sense. As the modern world moves beyond that, all of these things start to come to be seen as, like incredible and, folkloric or, superstitious, or just something that, ignorant people in the past believed because they didn't have science and they just believed all these kind of silly things, right? And we modern sophisticated people, we know that this is all, like they say by the 19th century, most Europeans don't believe in hell anymore. Like they just refuse. And then heaven, obviously they don't believe in, many people just don't believe in any type of afterlife, right? Because there's no source of knowledge for such things.
So it seems like, their epistemology is very myopic in nature. And
yes, it's very limited. It's very limited. Yeah. I mean, the modern worldview is in fact very limited. People think the opposite. They think, a traditional, quote unquote, traditional worldview, that's like provincial and myopic and limited, and modernity expands. It's not true, actually. Modernity expands the quantity. So when it comes to empirical science, we have learned a lot in the last couple hundred years that we didn't know before, like, billions of galaxies and distances that we could have never imagined in the universe, like, the outer space and things like that. But all of that is on the realm of physical existence, the realm of the shahada. Okay.
Yeah.
But all other realms of reality are denied. So reality used to be multi-layered. Okay. And the shahada realm was just one of them. And what modernity does is it crushes all of that. It gets rid of everything down to the empirical only. And then that empirical becomes extremely expanded, like very widely expanded. But people don't realize that, yes, that one realm is greatly expanded, but all the other realms have been eliminated. Wow. So in fact, it is a very unidimensional way of looking at the world. Because look, as Muslims, we don't deny any of that. We don't deny the empirical, right? As a Muslim, I don't deny that there are billions of stars and galaxies and all of this distance. I mean, I have no reason to I accept that, but that doesn't exhaust my worldview. I understand all of that as being, the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is greater than all things. And, for whom all of creation, he brought it into existence through his will. He maintains it at every moment through its will. Every single atom in the solar system, and not only the entire universe, is under the divine command, right? I don't need to deny that in order to accept the reality of these vast distances and all of these things that science has, uncovered, right? But that's what I'm saying. It's the way you look at it. When a Muslim scientist, even today, whether in the Muslim world or in the West, like someone who's properly grounded, they go to their labs. Many of them study science. Many of them study engineering, medicine, right? They go to their labs and they look in their microscope and they discover something new. The Muslim says what? Subhanallah, right? Like, because whatever you discover, it's a creation of Allah, right? Any amazing thing you discover, whether it's through the microscope at the, microscopic level, or through the telescope, so to speak, and, instruments which allow us to see very far into outer space, whatever like your paradigm is whatever exists, this is hadha khalqullah, that this is the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And so every scientific discovery increases your faith. It increases your, ta'ajjub, increases your sense of wonderment at the creation of Allah, right? Which is how the early modern scientists were. Newton was a very religious man. Kepler was like very mystical. Even Descartes was like a religious Catholic. I mean, these people, they looked out and they saw what they were doing as discovering, the beauty of God's creation. Like, we could very much sort of, their way of speaking would very much resonate with a Muslim. But, the modern world very quickly kind of moved beyond. They kind of said, well, that was just a remnant of the religious past, and all we really care about is the science itself. And they sort of left that behind. But what I think is that for many people in the West, the more they discover the world, the less religious they've become, because they see it as competing with God. They see like, okay, we only bring God in as an explanation when we don't have any other explanation. But if I can give you a scientific proof or reason, then I don't need to refer to the divine anymore. This is nonsense. This is like a conceptual, mistake that's made. And it's what they call the God of the gaps. I only bring in God as an explanation when there's a gap in my scientific knowledge. And as science progresses and you close the gaps, then, God gets like crowded out, so to speak. And then people say, well, we don't need that explanation anymore because we have a sufficient explanation. This is just based on completely wrong philosophical starting assumptions,